This is where children belong. Welcomed is part of our worshiping throng. Water, God's word, bread and cup, prayer and song. This is where children belong. So today is All Saints Sunday, what we just saw, and it's a day when we kind of remember all those people that we loved that have died. Have you ever had someone you love that has died? Yeah. I want you to kind of think about that time when someone that you loved passed away. And I'm going to share with you a story about Jesus. And this is a story we find in the New Testament. And we've talked about how the New Testament's kind of the second half of the Bible, and it's all the stories about Jesus and after him. And this is a story about what it feels like when someone you love dies. And sometimes does it feel really yucky? Yeah. So I'm going to read this for you. And it's about some siblings. Siblings Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. And they had learned to share. They were sharing really good things like huffs and puffs and eye rolls when they had to share. Do you guys ever do that? I know that real well. And other things they were really happy to share, like chores and secrets, and their favorite thing, their best friend, Jesus. Jesus loved them so much, and they loved Jesus. At least they thought Jesus loved them, because here they were, Mary and Martha, and they were preparing for their brother Lazarus' funeral. And they were upset because Jesus was nowhere to be found. I thought Jesus might heal him, cried Martha. How could he stay away? Sobbed Mary. They had sent a message to Jesus warning him that his friend and their brother Lazarus was really sick, and they thought Jesus was going to show up. And Lazarus got sicker and sicker, and he died. And now that it was much too late, they got word that Jesus was on his way. It is not fair, and it doesn't make sense, is what they thought when they heard that Jesus was coming. Martha ran to meet him, but Mary stayed at home, because grief, when you're really sad, that feeling of absolute sadness, it comes out in really different ways. For some people, grief is silent. For other people, they keep really, really busy so they don't have to think. That happens a lot. And for some people, a lot of people, when you're really sad and you're grieving, it comes out as anger and mad. And that's what showed up for Martha, because when Jesus showed up, she yelled, "If you had been here, Lazarus would not have died." Jesus listened. He just listened, and she went on. Her jaw and her fist were clenched. "But I know it's not too late. I know God will give you whatever you ask," she pleaded. Her hope was all tangled up in her anger and her sadness. Jesus did not try to untangle her feelings, and he said, "Lazarus will live again." "I know that," snapped Martha. "Someday he will live again, she said, "Someday he will live again." But Jesus just sat with her. How could he explain God's dream? How could he fit into words around the kingdom of already and almost, where there had been peeks and glimpses of how things should be? Lazarus will live because of me. Death is not the end for anyone who trusts me. Martha looked at Jesus and felt her heart break. Sometimes things sit side by side. We talk about this at home, don't we? That you can have more than one feeling at the same time. You can feel two things at the same time. And that's what she was feeling. She was feeling hope and sadness. She says sometimes heaven and earth, they squish and bump together in our hearts, and it aches sometimes. Eventually, Mary also came to meet Jesus, followed by a huge crowd that had gathered to come to mourn Lazarus. She collapsed at Jesus' feet. Mary looked up at her dear friend. She was so sad and tired. For days, waves of sorrow and hope and rage and anger and disbelief had swept over her again and again. But Jesus was here now, solid and silent, and too late. Ooh, she is mad. "If you had been here, my brother would not have died," she cried and cried and cried. Her friends and family joined her until it seemed as though their tears would soak the earth. They had no more tears left. She says, Jesus felt his own heartache and he began to cry. And just because he knew the end of the story did not mean that he wasn't sad. It didn't make the messy middle go away. Death and suffering and sadness, those things do not belong in the kingdom of heaven. But in Jesus, heaven bumped into earth and hope was bumping up against sorrow. Show me where you put him, Jesus cried. And they all walked slowly to the tomb with tears streaming down their face. But when Jesus told them to roll the stone away from the entrance, Martha jumped up and she says, his body has been dead for 4 days. But Jesus was God in a human body, and Jesus was stronger than death. Watch and see God's glory, Jesus said. And he prayed, thanking God for sending him to earth, this messy place of hope and sorrow. And then he opened his eyes, opened his mouth, and he shouted, Lazarus! He called to his beloved friend, Lazarus, come out here. Lazarus walked out of the tomb, and now there were tears of joy and thankfulness. They had no answers, only a peek, like they peeled back a glimpse of what Jesus was showing them about what God's kingdom was like. A kingdom with no suffering, a kingdom with no grief, and a kingdom with no death. They got a peek at what perfection looks like. We're going to go upstairs. We're going to talk a little bit more about what it feels like when someone we love dies. It feels so yucky, and we're going to go talk about that a little bit, aren't we? Let's go do that.